So I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome to the November 13th Sandag Public Safety Committee meeting. And let's start with the pledge. Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I ask the clerk to confirm that we have a quorum. Tessa, please.
Yes, good afternoon. We do have a quorum for this meeting.
Okay. And I have to read a quick disclaimer. I'd like to remind the members of the public of our new process for both members and public comments. The committee members will be using their cameras and will take live public comments. Members are asked to turn on their cameras when they have a comment or a question, and then I will recognize you. I'll ask legal counsel to provide a quick reminder on how the public comments will work. Please, Samantha.
Thank you, Vice Chair. If you are listening to today's meeting in Zoom, please use the raise hand icon in the toolbar to speak on an item. You will be called on by the name you provided. If you are listening by telephone, please press *9 if you'd like to speak on an item. You will be called on by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing comments during the meeting are also included in today's meeting agenda on the homepage at sandag.org. All comments, whether emailed or live, will be made a part of today's meeting record. And I'll hand it back to you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. And we'll start with approval of the meeting minutes. I'm looking for a motion.
Minto moved.
Thank you. Looking for a second.
Second, Gore.
Thank you. And take a roll call vote, please. Tessa.
Thank you. For Chiefs Association Seat 1, Chief Neil Gallucci.
Yes.
For Chiefs Association Seat 2, I believe is absent. City of San Diego, Councilmember Vivian Moreno.
Moreno, yes.
County of San Diego, Supervisor Greg Cox.
Cox, yes.
San Diego County District Attorney's Office, Chief Investigator Jorge Duran.
Duran, yes.
East County Mayor John Minto.
Minto, yes.
Regional Fire EMS, Chief Rick Vogt.
Yes.
North County Coastal, Vice Chair Keith Blackburn.
Blackburn, aye.
North County Inland, if you could please promote Deputy Mayor Amanda Rigby, I will call on her for her vote. San Diego Police Department, Assistant Chief Chris McGrath.
McGrath is a yes.
San Diego County Sheriff Bill Gore.
Yes.
South County Councilmember Mark West.
West, yes.
And for North County Inland, Deputy Mayor Amanda Rigby.
Yes.
Thank you. That item passes with those members present.
Thank you. On to item number 2, public comment. Do we have any public comments?
I do not see any hands raised at this time.
Okay, thank you. That'll be Hassan.
Thank you. Are we the executive director report, Chairman, right?
Yes, Hassan.
Yeah. Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
this is the executive director's report.
Thank you very much, Chairman Blackburn. Thank you, committee members. Good afternoon. It's good to be with you. A couple of items to update you on. One is on the audit action plan. As we speak, actually, it's been discussed with the audit committee today. The action plan based on the board action last month, based on Councilmember Moreno's motion, is moving to the audit committee. After which the audit committee will make recommendation to the board and will take it to the board on November 20th. I'm happy to report that that action plan is a product of collaboration between management and the independent auditor's office, Mary Kay and her staff. And I want to thank Mary Kay and her staff for her help. The action plan again will come to the board November 20th. Just a brief update on the agency's 5 priorities. I start with Otay Mesa 2, which is the proposed border crossing. As I'm happy to report great progress with our partners from Mexico. I have a meeting with our ambassador in Mexico City and the ambassador of Mexico in Washington, D.C. And we have a meeting with the Secretary of Transportation and Communication, Mexico Transportation and Communication. And happy to report that things are moving on the other side of the border. We're almost completing the last infrastructure project, which is Route 11. We hope that this facility will open in 2024. And for that, we have to start building the facility in 2022. I know this is not a long time to have this, but this is the goal we set for ourselves with our Mexican partners. I believe things are falling in place to achieve that. I think this border crossing will have a great economic benefit to the region. So that's one priority of SANDAG. The second priority is the 5 big moves in the regional transportation plan. And I'm happy to report to you that this is moving. The vision that was presented to the board a couple of months ago is now getting translated into a draft plan that will be released to the public in April of this year. I'm also happy to report to you that I, with my team, have made a presentation to a joint statewide audience, California Transportation Commission, Housing Development Department, and the Air Resources Board. And the comments we got from the statewide commission that this could be a statewide initiative, a multimodal approach to transportation where we add capacity at the same time we reduce greenhouse gas emission and vehicle mile travel. It is the data-based approach that we're probably the first in the state to use, and state agencies have a great desire to help us in funding to make sure this is a statewide approach to planning. The third priority, which is the Del Mar Bluff, I'm happy to report that the phase 4 of the stabilization is complete. I would hope to hear from California Transportation Commission by Monday about our pending application to complete 5 and 6, which I'm hoping that's a positive news next Monday. But let me remind you that we're talking about temporary stabilization. A long-term solution have to take place as we move forward with identifying what that long-term solution is. And the fourth priority, the NAVWAR, our work with the United States Navy in redeveloping NAVWAR. We were in Washington, D.C. with Mark Faulkner a couple of weeks ago, meeting with our Navy partners here, Navy Southwest, and things are progressing well. Mobility hub at San Ysidro as well, the second largest mobility hub. We're working in the aspects of that hub, giving the presentation of the plan for next week. Mr. Chair, that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Do we have any comments from the public? Not hearing a response. Are there any
My
PSC member
apologies,
comments?
There are no raised hands on this item, no public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any PSC member comments? Okay, hearing nothing, then we'll go on to item number 4. That'll be the Chiefs and Sheriffs Management Committee, and the presentation will be from Chief Neil Gallucci.
Thank you, Vice Chair. The report for today's meeting, the Chiefs and Sheriffs Management Committee meeting held a Zoom meeting on November 4, 2020. Agenda items included the UASI fiscal year 2021 law enforcement project review, Chiefs and Sheriffs Management Committee voted to recommend the Argus proposals to the Public Safety Committee for inclusion in the San Diego UOSI grant submission to the Urban Area Working Group. Dr. Cynthia Berg reported on drug use among arrestee population in San Diego County. And the next Management Committee meeting will be on Wednesday, December 2nd, 2020 at 9:45 a.m. Our report, I'm available for any questions.
Any questions from the public?
I see no hands raised at this time for public comment.
Thank you. Any comments from PSC members? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Neil. Move on to item number 5, the Fire Chiefs Association. And that will be Chief Vaught, please.
Good afternoon. Just a couple of items from the San Diego County Fire Chiefs Association meeting that was held on Zoom on November the 5th. We had a briefing on the transition of moving the regional geodata public safety database from the platform that was originally developed under a UOSI grant to Entera, which is hosted by the San Diego County Fire Authority. This is a common operating picture platform for all fire departments in San Diego County and includes data layers such as wild and urban interface and structure pre-plans, fuels management layers, fire history layers, and in the future would contain AVL or real-time location of resources. The second item of note is we also had presentations and a review of projects that are going to go before the Urban Area Working Group, including Regional Communication Interoperability Project, Incident Management Team Support, several CBR&E projects, and support for the regional VHF radio infrastructure system. End of report.
Thank you. Any comments from the public?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any hands raised for public comment on this item.
Thank you. Any comments from any PSC members? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Chief. Item number 6, new grant funding for the criminal justice research. And that presentation is going to be from Sandy Keaton.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, committee members. So as this committee is aware, the Applied Research Division receives most of its funding through grant from our partnerships and local stakeholders in the community. I'm here today because the division recently received one of these new projects requiring an amendment to our FY21 budget. It's also important to remember that prior to our applying for or partnering with anyone on a grant, we do come and seek approval from PSC and board leadership. The division was notified recently by one of our community partners, South Bay Community Services, who we've worked with for years, that it had been awarded its second California Violence Intervention Prevention, also known as CalVIP grant for the California Board of State and Community Corrections. Many of you may know it as the BSCC. This multi-year grant will be used to provide credible messenger mentoring and therapeutic mental health services in the community to individuals at highest risk for perpetuating violence and also being a victim of violence. The intent is to increase the resiliency and reduce involvement in violent crimes. The division was part of the grant application and will receive $155,000 as the outside evaluator to conduct a process and impact evaluation of the project. These programs will be enhancement activities provided to youth accessing current services in the community at the achievement centers and also through alternatives to detention and the choice program. A minimum of 75 high-risk youth will participate in these services a year and to address the needs that are contributing to their being involved in juvenile justice system. The division will provide its expertise in action research to help inform the implementation as it goes and measure if the project accomplished its goals. This is an information item to inform the Public Safety Committee of an amendment to the FY21 budget to add $155,000 to implement the evaluation activities for multiple years. That's all.
Thank you. Any comments from the public?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I see no hands raised for public comment on item 6.
Thank you. Any PSC member comments? Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Sandy. Moving on to item number 7, drug use among the arrestee population in San Diego County, and that'll be Cindy Burke.
Good afternoon, everybody. Great, thank you. If you could go to the next slide. So we've, for those of you, many of you have heard data when we present them on our SAM project, and this is an effort where we go into our local jails, and it started out being funded by the National Institute of Justice, and at its height, it was ongoing in about 40 cities across the country, and when funding was discontinued over time, San Diego was the only site that has been able to keep this program going uninterrupted, and that has been accomplished with the support of our probation and sheriff's department partnerships, as well as through funding support from the county of San Diego, as well as HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking areas. And what's come with us having that local funding, we've been able to tailor questions over time. This committee has given us input and data to help tailor questions that are of specific interest. And because we have improved sampling, we now have 20 years of data going back till 2000. And so, we do appreciate this program. We had a meth strike force report card, and that's an example of how our data is used regionally to inform how are we doing. It informs treatment, prevention, interdiction efforts. And it is one of the only objective measures of drug use, perhaps the only objective measure of drug use we have over time, because we get anonymous, confidential interviews. We're able to track drug use trends over time. This is a high-risk population that may be a harbinger for drug trends in other populations over time. And it is important to note, though, when we do look at this data, that justice systems have changed, and I'll be showing some data specifically. I'm told I just got a message to turn off my computer, so I'm going to turn it off just so you can hear me. That'll improve the connection. So that's what we have with data here. So if you go to the next slide, please. Just to give you a sense of our sample of who we talked to in 2019, almost 500 adults, majority are male, various ethnic group, and you can also see a variety of drug charge, different types of charges that they were booked into jail for, around 100 juveniles. Again, the average age about 16, males and females, and again, diverse in terms of ethnicity as well as the reasons that they're booked into jail. So these aren't only individuals who would be for a drug offense.
Cindy, may I interrupt you for just a moment?
Yes.
I just want to check with the other members. You're cutting out on my computer. Is that the problem for everyone or just me?
No, it's everyone. I can't hear her either.
Okay. Cindy, let's figure out your issue and then come back to you, because we're only hearing about half of what you're saying.
Okay. I will
Thank
work
you.
with our support staff.
Okay, thank you, Cindy, for being understanding. Move on to item number 8, Fast Act Performance Management Rule number 1, target setting, and that'll be Sam Stanford, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
You sound perfect.
All right. Yeah, let me know if I start cutting out. I've been having some issues on my end as well. So today's item is on the 2021 Performance Management Rule 1, sets a series of requirements for MPOs like SANDAG to set safety targets for the region in total. But before diving into the details on this agenda item, briefly want to preface it essentially on the critical importance of safety planning, safety programming, obviously with the ultimate goal of driving down the number of crashes and the severity of crashes. So this item happens to be focused just on setting targets to meet a requirement that's established by the Federal Highway Administration for metropolitan planning organizations. But I do want to emphasize that there is ongoing work parallel to this to help identify and deliver those projects and programs and policies that are aimed at reducing the number and severity of crashes on public roads. So 2 quick examples that SANDAG is working with Caltrans on is the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. It's a 4-year document or 4-year plan that looks at identifying challenge areas, kind of contributing factors to crashes that are higher in certain areas than others, and helping address those over a 4-year period. And And there's also the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is a funding source. And there's an implementation plan that's being developed with that this will be the first year for that. And that plan is focused on how best to spend those limited dollars. So looking at delivery of projects that have the highest impact on driving down those numbers and severity of crashes. So I wanted to just provide that background a little bit before diving into this item, since this item is so focused on just targets themselves. So this is the 4th year of setting targets for the region, set annually for the calendar year. Each MPO, like Sandag, has the option of either supporting targets that are set at the state level for Caltrans or developing regional targets. For the past 3 years, 2018, 2019, and 2020, Sandag has elected to support the statewide target. And that's been the staff recommendation based on how the data is showing our region doing well compared to the state. Can you advance one slide, please? So these are the 5 performance measures that are listed in the federal rulemaking from Federal Highway Administration that we are required to collect data on or use their data on as far as reporting. We have the number and rate of fatalities. And by rate, we're looking at, you think of it as an exposure idea, how much people are out there. So it's based on the 100 million vehicle miles traveled. There's also the number and rate of serious injuries. And there's also the 5th one there is a combined measure that looks at non-motorized serious injuries and fatalities. So that brings in both cyclists and pedestrians into one measure itself. Those are the 5 measures. The process itself, on the next slide, it starts with Caltrans, and they set statewide targets at late August. They have discretion on how they want to set the targets. For 2021, they looked at setting the targets based on trend. They looked at the most recently available data, which was 2017 and 2018. There's a significant lag with available final data for crashes on public roadways. So they were able to look at 2017 and 2018, and they looked at the change over those 2 years. They also brought in other information, such as how much people are traveling or not traveling, what they anticipate the economy to be doing, because that also influences the amount of travel. They brought in their thoughts at the time back in August about what's going to be the impact of COVID. But based on that, that's how they established their targets for statewide. Sandag then is required to set targets, either support statewide or develop our own regional ones by February 28th of 2021. So if we advance one more slide, if Sandag continues to support the statewide targets, then we will we don't have to set our own numeric targets. We would just be providing Caltrans a resolution showing that we support the statewide. And then for integration with planning and programming, within the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or the RTIP, we actually document projects that help support those targets. So projects that are safety focused or have multiple aspects that are focused on driving down crashes or high severity crashes. Additionally, in the regional plan, there's an appendix that highlights essentially our progress towards targets as far as how we've done in the past several years. We have available data and how we're tracking on those. Next slide, please. So these are the targets that came from Caltrans. So these are the statewide. The left-hand column is the 5 performance measures. The center column is the numeric target that's Caltrans has set, and you'll see decimals in some places. Caltrans is required to use a 5-year rolling average. That's why we see some decimal points on these targets. And the furthest right-hand column is essentially the percent reduction that Caltrans came up with when they looked at the trend from the most recently available data. So for fatalities, they're looking at a trend down of 2.9% per year. So they applied that to the first 2 performance measures. For serious injuries, they also saw a reduction, slightly less, of 1.3%. Then for the 5th measure, they combined those 2 rates into the fatalities and serious injuries. The next 5 slides dive into a little bit of the details of observed data that we have for the state and also for the region to give us a sense of what we're seeing. So everything in blue represents statewide values. Everything in orange represents San Diego region. These little, it's not meant to be an eye test, but little pink dots off to the right are past targets. And then that bigger red one is the 2021 target, which is up for discussion today. Should we continue to support the statewide targets or if we should develop regional ones? The bars are annual values and the lines, the blue line here, for instance, is the 5-year rolling average for statewide. So looking at this in general, we can see that there was a significant uptick in fatalities on all public roads statewide in 2016 and 2017. It appears that it leveled off, or it peaked at that time and started falling in 2018. And that's what Caltrans was looking at when they set their targets for 2021. You can see that 2019 and 2020 is still blank. Those data are not final, so we do not have those numbers yet. So setting targets is a challenging operation since you have to interpret 2 years that have passed that you don't actually have data for. If we advance one more slide. So here we have fatality rate by VMT, vehicle miles traveled. Again, everything in blue is statewide and everything in orange is for the San Diego region. This is a little easier to see how the San Diego region is doing relative to the state, since the data is essentially being normalized by the amount of driving people do. And we can see that in the San Diego region, we're doing well comparable to the state. The state still has that significant rise in the 2016, 2017 years. The San Diego region has stayed relatively flat comparatively. Next slide, please. For serious injuries, we can see this troubling uptick, unfortunately, statewide for the blue values that has been increasing over the years, really for this time period that's on this chart. The San Diego values in orange, however, are staying relatively flat. They're not having that same trend. And then again, you can see the target for 2021 in the red square off to the right-hand side. For serious injury rate on the next slide, here we can see a little easier a comparison to how our region is doing relative to the state. And although the values are closer than we saw with fatality rate, the San Diego region is still doing well compared to the statewide values. Next slide. This is the last chart, I promise. So this one is non-motorized. This is bringing in cyclist and pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries all combined into one metric. Again, statewide, we see the troubling increase over the time period on the chart. For San Diego region, it's staying relatively flat. We do not see that same trend in a upward direction. Next slide, please. Now you may have noticed on a few of those charts as I went through them that had past targets, that some of the targets seem to be lower than what the observed data was. So now that we actually have observed data for 2018, Federal Highway Administration looks back at the state targets and sees how the state did. So for 2018, California was not able to demonstrate significant progress on the 5 targets that they made. There was 2 areas that they did make significant progress, but 3 that they did not. And those were fatality rate, serious injury rate, and number of serious injuries. So due to that, Caltrans has to develop an implementation plan for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, which is something Caltrans is taking on. They see it as a positive improvement, a good thing to do for planning that limited resource anyway. So they're taking that piece on. Next slide, please. So as far as next steps for the target setting for 2021, we are wrapping up our work through with our working groups and giving this a similar presentation and getting discussions and feedback. And we're going towards policy advisor committees, yourselves today, with the aim of going on December 18th to the board of directors to ask them to approve targets, and then ultimately send a resolution to Caltrans stating that SANDAG is either supporting the statewide targets and continuing what we've done in the last 3 years or developing our own. For integration into programming, in the 2021 RTIP, which is under development right now, there'll be an updated section that highlights projects that support safety targets. And then also in the regional plan, there'll be a section in the appendix system performance report that will also demonstrate our tracking of how we are supporting those targets. So that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to take any comments, questions you may have.
Thank you, Sam. Any comments from the public?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any hands raised for public comment on this item.
Thank you. Any PSC member comments? Okay, hearing none, that's an information-only presentation. Moving on to item number 9, California Office of Emergency Service Earthquake Warning California Outreach Campaign. And that presentation is going to be by Emily Holland, please.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for putting up this slide deck. My name is introduced, my name is Emily Holland. I'm with Earthquake Warning California program. We move on to the next slide. Next slide, please.
Emily, it looks like you're using Cindy's computer. We're only hearing about half of what you're saying. I just want to check with the other board members. Is everybody else having a problem with the audio?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Emily, is there something else you can try?
I can try something. I can try to call in from my phone. Do we want to check with Cindy and see if she might have a better connection at this point? Not waste time.
Okay, thank you. We'll come
Thank
right
you.
back to you. So Cindy, have you worked out your bugs?
I'm in the Sandag boardroom, so hopefully so. Hopefully so. Hopefully so. Can you hear me now?
Sound loud and clear. So
Okay,
Cindy,
do we want to go back to?
So Cindy, rather than
Okay.
beginning at the beginning, do you want to resume your presentation at the point where I interrupted you?
I'll start over and I'll go as quickly as I can, just
Okay.
For those who could hear every other word. So I'm here today to present our data from 2019 data collection from the SAM project. And for those who are not aware of this project, we go into local jails, we do a confidential and anonymous interview with arrestees, both adult and juveniles. This used to be funded across the country as part of a cross-site study, and we were the only site that has been able to keep that going uninterrupted since the inception of it, and that has been through the gracious support of the County of San Diego and HIDA, as well as our partnerships with the San Diego County Probation Department and Sheriff's Department. And most of the data that we do have about drug use trends over time is self-report either through school surveys or household surveys. So this really does offer a unique opportunity to compile data over time that no other site has. And then because we do have local funding support, we're able to add questions over time, including questions from this committee, to make sure that we have the most relevant and up-to-date information to make public policy decisions related to treatment prevention, as well as outreach and law enforcement. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the samples. We talked to almost 500 adults, about 100 juveniles. They're booked into jails for a number of different reasons. It's not just drug offenses. And we do like to highlight, though, there's been a number of significant changes in our justice system over time, both the adult and the juvenile. And with the adults, we've had legalization of marijuana, for example, and I'll be talking about that. AB 109, which changed our local jails into local prisons. And there's been a big push to keep juveniles out of our local detention system. So all these factors could also affect our drug use trends that we're seeing over time. Excuse me, guys. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So our first slide is looking at drug use overall. And this shows the positive drug test rates for both, it includes marijuana, meth, cocaine, crack, PCP, as well as opiates. And what this slide shows is our females tested positive at a higher rate than our males. And we had 20-year highs for both adult males, females, and juveniles in 2019. 82% of our females, 79% of our adult males, and 62% of our juveniles tested positive for one of those 5 substances, if not multiple ones. Next slide, please. This slide shows the effect of public policy changes over time from AB 109, which was public safety realignment, which again put local control to many individuals in our justice system. Prop 47, which made a number of property and drug offenses instead of being felonies or wobblers to being misdemeanors, and Prop 64. And when all these changes happened,
I thought it might be possible that we might see actually lower drug positive rates in our adult population of both males and females, but as you can see, the percentages are higher than they ever have been before and have generally continued to trend upwards. Next slide, please. I think this is an important slide when we go out to community groups, because regardless if somebody's arrested for a drug offense or not, there definitely is regardless of what one's opinion is about criminalization of drug use and whether there should be a hammer of some type of repercussion if somebody does not want to go to drug treatment, there is a high correlation between drug use and crime, as shown by this figure here. This shows the highest reason that somebody was booked into our local jails or local prison, either for any drug or multiple drugs. And as you can see, very high percentages of arrestees, regardless of why they're getting into our justice system for a violent, a property, a drug, or some other type of offense, are testing positive for at least one of the substances, as well as multiple substances. Next slide, please. I'm going to be going through some of our three most common drugs. So starting out with marijuana. Marijuana is the drug of choice for our juveniles who are booked into juvenile hall. You can see 57% were positive in 2019. Compared to 45% of males, that was down slightly from the previous year, and 39% of females, that was up slightly. Next slide, please. Regardless, again, of where someone may fall on legalization of marijuana, it still is, even with Prop 64, is illegal for anyone under the age of 21. And what we've seen with our data here is that marijuana use has gone up and perceptions of a harm have gone down, which I'll show in the following slides, since medical marijuana and legalization have gone into effect. So you can see most of the youth booked into the hall have tested positive for marijuana. We have a higher percentage than ever saying that it was the first substance that they ever tried. More often, it's the first drug before alcohol or tobacco now. The average age of first use is around 12 for marijuana. Very high percentage are using it in the past 30 days. And what I think is very troubling and is important news to get out with information and statistics for educators, parents, prevention groups, is just how often youth who are using marijuana are using it. Those who say that they've used alcohol in the past 30 days are using it about 6.7 days out of the past 30 on average. You can see the youth who are using marijuana in the past 30 days are using it every other day on average. And again, very high percentages saying that it's very easy to obtain it. Next slide, please. Perception of harm. We asked the youth, how much do you think a drug is extremely bad or very bad, could be bad for the user? And you can see that only 17% think that marijuana could have any negative effects on somebody who's using it, compared to 37% of alcohol and 58% for tobacco. If you go to the next slide, I mentioned that we are very careful. We never want to say one thing causes the other, but there is a correlation. When we first asked the question in 2007, which are the blue bars here, you can see the percentage that said that they thought the drug could be extremely or very bad for a user, and marijuana, alcohol were pretty similar at 42 and 45%. When you look at that decrease to our most recent data in 2019, there's been decreases for alcohol and tobacco as well as marijuana, but not to the same extent. There's really been a much larger drop in the perception of harm related to marijuana that correlates with legalization. Next slide, please. We added new questions. Again, I said we have because we have the local funding, we have the ability to add new questions. And so in 2019, we asked juveniles a series of questions regarding the vaping. We know the County of San Diego has been looking at a lot of efforts to try to reduce availability of vaping products and devices for youth in our communities. And 3/4 of the youth that we talked to said that they had ever vaped. Most of those had vaped the flavored nicotine, which I know there's a lot of PSAs out nowadays trying to educate individuals more about the dangers of that. But 3/4 have also vaped THC. About half have said that they have vaped at school. The majority, almost 3 in 5, think that vaping is not harmful. Most of the youth that we talk to who have used nicotine prefer it to cigarettes. And again, a very high percentage, almost 3 in 5, saying that they vaped in the past 30 days. And again, they're vaping fairly frequently, again, almost about half the month, about 13 days out of the past 30. Next slide, please. Looking at some of the adult data related to marijuana, this was a slide that one of our law enforcement partners asked, is how many of the individuals who are testing positive for any drug are testing positive for just marijuana or something more than marijuana. So we looked at just those individuals who tested positive for marijuana, and you can see that 1 in 3 of the individuals who are positive for marijuana, these are adults, were only positive for marijuana, but 2/3 were also positive for something else, most often meth, using meth and marijuana in combination. Next slide, please. And again, when we talk about use, and we've seen additional statistics about more frequent ER visits, for example, the potency. I know that there's objective statistics maintained by law enforcement, but we also asked the adults and the juveniles, do you think the potency of the marijuana that you're using is increased? And this shows just for adults because they've been using for a longer period of time. And you can see 2/3 of the adults say that yes, the potency of the marijuana, the higher THC levels, is something that they're very cognizant of since they started using marijuana. Next slide, please. Another important data point, and before the Prop 64 passed, we went with our local law enforcement partners to Denver to find out what data did they wish they had as a baseline and had tracked over time. And one of the hypotheses was that when legal marijuana recreational dispensaries could be open, that there would be no black market for it. And we're actually finding that that's not the case, at least for the arrestee population. The pie chart on the left shows what percentage of individuals said that they purchased marijuana only one way versus multiple ways. And you can see that about 55% said they only purchased it from one type of source, whether it be on the street, illegally still, recreational dispensary, medical dispensary, a recreational delivery, or some other way such as growing their own plants. But that almost half, 45%, said that they bought it multiple ways. The bar chart on the right shows the percent that said that they'd ever used that type of method to obtain the marijuana versus their preferred method. And you can see that about 2/3 say that they have bought it in the past 12 months on the street and recreationally. There was a slight preference for recreational dispensaries because they said that they had a better selection. But when we asked the individuals who said that they preferred it on the street, they cited not having to pay tax. It could be cheaper. It was easier in many cases for them. Next slide, please. Another concern that we've had, and I know the California Highway Patrol has been looking at this closely, is driving under the influence, and how do you test for that in the field, because it's not the same type of test for alcohol. But we asked 2 questions. We said, do you think marijuana impacts your driving ability? And then, have you ever driven under the influence of marijuana? And as you can see, it's about evenly split. About half of the individuals, 49%, thought that the marijuana does impact somebody's driving. 51% said that it does not impact their driving. But then looking at of those who felt that way, have they driven under the influence? And you can see even those who think it does impact them, 43% say that yes, they still are driving under the influence of it. And those who don't think it impacts their driving, 10% more, 53% say that yes, they've driven under the influence of marijuana. Next slide, please. Turning to meth, this was the press event that we had today. We had 20-year highs of the percent positive for meth, and we used to be the meth capital of the world. Because we don't have these stats from other areas, it's difficult to compare, but it's even more important that we continue to work together. You can see that 2/3 of the women booked into Las Colinas in 2019 tested positive for meth, as well as just over half of the adult males. It was 11% for juveniles. Next slide, please. This shows the average, the typical meth adult arrestee who used it. They reported using it a median, an average of 15 years. They used it about 3 times a day. When we asked them what was the longest run of meth use that they had in the past 30, it was about 15. They obtained 1 gram last time they had used it. We asked those who were employed or students if they had ever used it in the past year before they went to work or school, and 3/4 said that they had. And then about 1 in 3 also said that they carried a weapon when they obtained meth. This slide compares 2012 to 2019, and when we first started doing a lot of our research into meth, we saw significant ethnic differences in youth, and that whites were significantly more likely. Back in 2012, you can see 48% were positive for meth. Only 1/4 of Black or African American populations were. But by 2019, that difference has gone away. Now we find that regardless of the arrestee's ethnicity, there's a high positive rate across our different ethnic groups here. Next slide, yes. We did a special CJ Flash last year, And we really wanted to try to get at some of the issues of dual diagnosis, as well as potentially drug-induced psychoses. And what this slide shows is just some of the correlations that we have here, where it could be self-medicating. What comes first, is the chicken or the egg, is a hard question to answer. Did meth use come first before mental health issues, or did mental health issues come and then meth use? But you can see that those who reported they ever tried meth were significantly more likely to say that they've ever been diagnosed with a mental health issue than those who had not tried meth. They more significantly more likely to say that they've ever stayed overnight in a mental health facility, and they're also more likely to say that they've ever had a prior suicide attempt. So trying to provide additional information about the need for dual types of treatment for dealing with a drug addiction as well as mental health issues is going to be something I think that continues to be important. Next slide, please. Opiates. So our percent of positive individuals positive for opiates is much lower than we used to see when this was on the East Coast, but we have essentially doubled over time. You can see that in 2000, when the sampling for these adults started, it was 7% for females, and now it's 15%, 6% of males, 11% of males in 2019. And this could be heroin or prescription opiates. Next slide, please. Back in 2007, which was one of the more recent years, we used to see that the individuals who were most likely to be positive for opiates in our justice system were older. You can see only 4% of those under 25 were positive, but in 2019 we had 12% of those under 25 were positive. So it really reflects the abuse of prescription drugs that we've seen over time, and that potentially transitioning into heroin, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Again, this slide shows some of the age differences in 2019. This is self-report, so it's not the positive for opiates, but have you ever abused prescription drugs? And you can see that those under 25 and 25 to 39 were significantly more likely to say that they've ever abused prescription drugs compared to those who are 40 and older. Next slide, please. We added a question when we became aware of some of this transition, and 1/3 of the individuals, adults, who said that they had ever used heroin said that they were hooked on prescription drugs before heroin. And of those, the majority said that they began to use heroin as a substitute, many times because it was cheaper or easier to get than the prescription drugs. And then when we asked them what the prescription drug was that they were hooked on before they started using heroin, it was most often Oxycontin, Vicodin, or Percocet. Fentanyl has received a lot of attention for very good reason, because of how, and we've had presentations to the TSC on the dangers of fentanyl and how such a small dose could be lethal compared to the same amount for heroin, and how many times there may be fentanyl in a drug and the user is not aware that it contains it. So in 2018, we added a new question to our adult questionnaire saying, if you knew a drug contained fentanyl, would you purchase it? In 2018, this is actually good news, 69% said no, 31% said yes, they would, or they didn't know what they would do. Those percentages have flipped, so hopefully it seems like at least there's education in some way going out among this population. 89% said no, they would not purchase a drug if they knew it contained fentanyl, and there was a higher level of knowledge about the dangerousness of it. Some still said that they didn't know what it was or that it wasn't their drug of choice. But of those, about 1 in 10 who said they still would potentially buy it if they knew it contained fentanyl, it's because they were looking for that opiate type high, they wanted a strong high, or they were curious, for the most common reasons. These were new questions we added in 2019, and it's a very startling stat. We asked if they have all the individuals that we talked to in the adult system as part of this interview, did you ever do a drug in the past year that you thought contained fentanyl? You didn't buy it knowing it contained fentanyl, but something about the effect it had on you led you to think that it contained fentanyl. And 27% said that they thought that it had happened to them, it occurred to them. So about 1 in 4. Fentanyl testing strips are something that's available where a drug user could actually put it into a product to see if it contained fentanyl before it was used. And only 4% of the arrestees said that they've ever had access to that, but many of the arrestee population said they would like to have access to that if it was possible or available, but about half. Next slide, please. and I believe this might be my last slide. What we want to show here is many times when we go out and do this presentation, we've gotten feedback of why do I care about these stats? These aren't individuals. I don't know anyone who uses drugs. It's not affecting me. And we really want to show, again, the correlation between drug use and crime and the effects on the community, and how we really need to tackle this as a problem in a diverse set of ways working together. This is the percent of adult arrestees who tested positive for any drug, and you could see that over almost 3/4 had reported a history of homelessness. Over half have children. Again, many people going to work drunk or high. About 1 in 3 report that they have committed a crime to support a drug habit. 1 in 3 have had a child welfare services case. Going to the ER because of an alcohol or drug-related issue, missing work, and then also having a drug overdose. Next slide, please. And that was my presentation. So hopefully you could hear me, and hopefully I shared some information. I'm happy to answer any questions or take any feedback for any questions of interest that we may want to consider for 2021.
Thank you, Cindy. Any comments from the public?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any hands raised from the public at this time.
Thank you. Any PSC member comments? Hearing none. Thank you so much, Cindy. That's very informational. It's stuff I'm probably going to repeat to family and friends. Let's go back to item number 9, California Office of Emergency Services Earthquake Warning. And that's Emily, please. All right, do we have our problem fixed? Emily, you're muted.
Hi. Can you hear me now?
So far, so good.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity and for your patience as I figured out technical issues. My name is Emily Holland. I'm with Earthquake Warning California, and we are launching a Don't Get Caught Off Guard campaign. Next slide, please. So Earthquake Early Warning has been around for about 30 years in the test case, and in October of last year, the governor announced that public alerting would begin. We have done this after the push of the legislature in 2013 through 2016, as well as some general funds. So now that we are about a year in, we're developing an education campaign to help notify people about all the tools that are available. We are the first statewide earthquake warning system. And not only can we provide individual alerts on phones, but we also can provide help to public safety, first responders, and other private sector entities. And all of this information is available at earthquake.ca.gov. Next slide, please. Wanted to go over some of the tools that are available to get warnings. The first is the MyShake app. It was developed by UC Berkeley, and funding was added to it for public alerting. And one of the keys is that if you have this app available and you can download it for free from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, it will give people up to seconds of warning to drop, cover, and hold on. Next slide, please. With the MyShake app, you have location services have to be enabled, and it will send a push notification. One thing that's key is that none of these things are earthquake predictors. They only tell you from when the shaking is first detected in the ground to when the more significant shaking is felt in a location. So we're actually just playing with a couple short seconds to figure out where the earthquake is likely to be centered and how strong it will likely be. And we are continuing to upgrade the system and refine the process. Next slide, please. The final component is this is actually being used for research as well, and using phones in crowdsourced data to potentially increase the warning zone by having many more seismometers in the form of cell phones. So that's another component of the app. Next slide, please. We are very excited that we partnered with Google and USGS in August and are now providing earthquake warnings via Android devices that have either had updated operating systems or are new. So without even having to download an app, if people check their phone settings to make sure that earthquake alerts are enabled, they'll receive alerts on their Android phones. Next slide, please. We are also using wireless emergency alerts. One thing to point out is that for the MyShake app and Android phones, they will receive alerts if there's a magnitude 4.5 earthquake, and it would trigger weak shaking in their area. the WEA threshold is a little bit higher. So it's a 5.0 magnitude with light shaking. So whether you get an alert or not is whether the system estimates that you will receive what level of shaking in your area. One of the benefits, as you all are very familiar with, it's much easier if you have opt-out technology versus opt-in, and that's one of the benefits of WEA. Next slide, please. We just do another component of the program is earthquake warnings are great, but they're not as helpful if you don't know what to do. And part of it is we capitalize on the California Earthquake Country Alliance program, and they have identified 7 steps, the first of which being to identify hazards in your home, plan a kit, and make a plan. These are the steps where downloading the app and checking the alerts makes sense. Then creating plans like getting insurance and how to minimize your financial hardships. Next slide, please. Then we also have what to do actually during an earthquake, which is step 5. And hopefully you already have these warning tools in hand. Then step 6 is to improve your safety as you clean up. And finally, next, step 7 is to recover. Next slide, please. Is how to recover and restore daily life and get back to normal. We have the next slide, please. We also just do a brief reminder about what to do if you're in various situations and you may not have something like a desk or a table to drop, cover, and hold under. So we like to provide reminders about what to do if you're driving or in bed or in other situations. Next slide, please. So we're really excited about this campaign. And in addition to having resources like presentations and digital media and TV campaigns, we also have toolkits that are available and fact sheets that are sector specific on the website of earthquake.ca.gov. In addition to an English version of the site, we have a completely mirrored Spanish version of the site, and all of the additional toolkits and fact sheet materials are available in 5 additional languages, as well as the social media products. Next slide, please. So the big takeaway is it's a 3-step takeaway that we're asking. We're asking people to download the app, check phone settings, visit earthquake.ca.gov for more information. And we are happy to have more presentations like this for any local governments or nonprofit or volunteer groups that are interested to answer questions and provide information. And as I mentioned before, the toolkits and the fact sheets and all those resources are available on the website. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Emily. Any questions or comments from the public?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I do not see any hands raised for public comment.
Thank you. Anything from PSC members? Thank you very much, Emily. On to item number 10. Did we have any comments from the public that who didn't log on early enough for the beginning of the meeting?
I do not see any hands raised at this time for continued public comments.
Okay, thank you. Any closing statements or anything anyone wants to add from PSC members? You guys are making it easy on me. Then with that, our next scheduled meeting will be Friday, December 18th, 2020 at 1:00 p.m. Did I miss anything? Hearing nothing, then we are adjourned.